The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft, golden stripes across the living room floor. I was sitting on the couch, absent-mindedly flipping through channels on the TV, though none of it really held my attention. My mind had been wandering for the past few days, but I wasn't quite ready to admit why. My girlfriend, Claire, had gone out to meet some friends, leaving me alone in her family's house for a few hours. It was supposed to be a quiet, uneventful day. But then Emma walked in. Emma was Claire's younger sister, only by 2 years, but that small gap had always made her seem like the more carefree and spontaneous one. She had a way about her that was hard to ignore, energetic, lively, and always the center of attention whenever we were all together. Today, though, she seemed more subdued. She entered the room quietly, her expression thoughtful as she glanced at me. "Hey," she said, her voice soft as she walked over and sat on the armchair across from me. "Hey," I replied, offering a quick smile, though something about her presence made me feel off balance. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Emma leaned back in the chair, crossing her legs. She was wearing a loose t-shirt and shorts, nothing unusual, but the way her eyes lingered on mine for a second longer than normal sent a shiver down my spine. "You're here all by yourself?" she asked, her tone casual, though there was an underlying curiosity there. "Yeah," I said, clearing my throat. "Claire went out with some friends, so I'm just waiting for her to get back." Emma nodded, her gaze drifting toward the TV. "Mind if I hang out for a bit? I'm bored and it's way too hot outside to do anything." "Sure," I said, shifting a little on the couch. "I don't mind." The air between us felt different, thicker almost. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just because I was tired or maybe a little distracted. But as we sat there in the quiet of the room, the tension began to build. Every time I glanced at Emma, she seemed to be watching me, her eyes flicking away just as mine met hers. There was something unsaid lingering in the air, and it was starting to make me feel nervous. After a few minutes of silence, Emma broke the tension with a sigh. "You've been spending a lot of time here lately," she said, her voice a little quieter now. "Yeah, I guess so," I replied, trying to keep things light. "I mean, Claire and I have been together for a while, so it makes sense." Emma's gaze flicked up to meet mine again, and this time she didn't look away. "Does it?" she asked, her tone more serious than before. I frowned, unsure of where she was going with this. "What do you mean?" She shifted in her seat, leaning forward a little. "I mean, does it make sense? You and Claire, I mean." Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. "Of course it does," I said, though there was a slight tremor in my voice that I didn't like. "Why wouldn't it?" Emma shrugged, but the way she was looking at me made my heart beat a little faster. "I don't know. I guess I just thought, maybe things aren't as perfect as they seem." There it was, that unspoken thing between us. I had felt it before in passing moments when Emma and I were alone together, but I had always brushed it aside. Now, though, it was undeniable. There was something more here, something dangerous. I cleared my throat, trying to shake off the growing tension. "Claire and I are fine," I said, though the words sounded hollow even to me. Emma stood up, taking a slow step toward the couch. "Are you?" she asked softly, her eyes never leaving mine. I should have stopped this right then. I should have said something, anything, to put up a wall between us. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself caught in the pull of whatever was happening, unable to look away from her. "Emma, what are you doing?" I asked, though my voice had lost its edge. She stopped just in front of the couch, her fingers lightly trailing over the back of the chair she had been sitting in. "I don't know," she whispered, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability in her voice that made my chest tighten. "But I think we both feel it, don't we?" The room felt impossibly small. My pulse quickened, my heart pounding in my chest as I looked up at her. There was no denying it anymore. I had tried, but now, as she stood there in front of me, her eyes searching mine, I couldn't pretend that I didn't feel it too. "Emma," I started, but the words died on my lips. She moved closer, her hand resting on the arm of the couch beside me. Her presence was overwhelming, and I could feel the heat of her body, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the air between us. My breath caught in my throat as her fingers lightly grazed my arm, a touch so soft it could have been accidental, but I knew it wasn't. "We shouldn't," I whispered, though I didn't move away. Emma's gaze softened, and there was something almost pleading in her eyes. "I know," she said, her voice barely audible. "But that doesn't make it any easier." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, but it was useless. The tension between us was too strong, the pull too undeniable. When I opened my eyes again, she was sitting on the edge of the couch, her face inches from mine. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I murmured, though the words felt distant, as if they were coming from someone else. Emma leaned in, her lips barely brushing against my cheek as she whispered, "Neither do I." For a heartbeat, we were frozen there, suspended in the moment. And then, without thinking, without even meaning to, I turned my head, my lips meeting hers in a soft, hesitant kiss. The kiss was brief, almost fragile, as if we both weren't sure we were ready to cross that line. I pulled back slightly, my heart racing, every nerve in my body on high alert. I looked into Emma's eyes, searching for something, some sign that this was a mistake, that we should stop before it was too late. But instead, her gaze softened, and I saw the same confusion, the same desire reflected back at me. Neither of us spoke, the air between us thick with the weight of what had just happened. My pulse thundered in my ears, and for a moment, I thought maybe I could pull away, maybe I could take it all back before things went any further. But then Emma's hand brushed lightly against my face, her fingers soft against my skin, and the resolve I had been clinging to crumbled. She leaned in again, her lips meeting mine with more certainty this time, and I found myself kissing her back, the guilt and doubt fading into the background as the heat between us took over. The kiss deepened, and I could feel her body press closer to mine, her hand sliding down to rest on my chest. My thoughts swirled in a haze of confusion and desire, the rational part of my mind screaming at me to stop, but the rest of me, my body, my heart, was too far gone to listen. Emma's fingers tangled in my hair as she pulled me closer, her breath warm against my lips, and I felt a rush of emotions surge through me, desire, guilt, fear, all tangled together in a way that made it impossible to think clearly. I knew this was wrong, that we were crossing a line we could never uncross, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. Not now. As the kiss grew more intense, Emma shifted, moving to straddle my lap, her body pressing against mine in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. My hands moved instinctively to her waist, holding her closer, and the room around us seemed to fade into nothing, leaving only the two of us in the center of this whirlwind of emotions. I could feel the weight of everything we weren't saying, the unspoken understanding that this was more than just a kiss, more than just a fleeting moment of weakness. There was something deeper here, something we had both been avoiding for far too long. And now that we had crossed this line, there was no going back. "Emma," I murmured against her lips, though I wasn't sure what I was trying to say. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, my heart pounding so hard I could barely catch my breath. She pulled back slightly, her forehead resting against mine, her eyes fluttering open to meet my gaze. There was a softness there, a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know this is wrong." I swallowed hard, trying to find some shred of clarity in the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "We can't do this," I said, though my hands were still resting on her hips, betraying the words that were supposed to stop this before it went too far. Emma's fingers traced a light line along my jaw, her touch sending a wave of heat through me. "I've been trying to ignore this for so long," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I can't anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I realized just how deep this went for both of us. This wasn't just a moment of weakness, a fleeting attraction that could be brushed aside. There was something more between us, something neither of us had been willing to admit until now. "We can't pretend this didn't happen," she continued, her voice soft but certain. "Not anymore." I closed my eyes, my head spinning as I tried to wrap my mind around the gravity of what we were doing. I should have stopped her, I should have pulled away, but I couldn't. The connection between us was too strong, the pull too undeniable. And even though I knew this would change everything, I couldn't bring myself to let go. Emma's lips found mine again, and this time, there was no hesitation. The kiss was deeper, more intense, and I felt myself giving in completely, surrendering to the desire that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. My hands moved up her back, pulling her closer, and the world around us disappeared, leaving only the heat of her body against mine, the taste of her lips, the feel of her fingers in my hair. Time seemed to blur, and I lost myself in the moment, in the way Emma's body fit perfectly against mine, in the way her kisses sent shivers down my spine. It was like nothing else existed, no guilt, no consequences, just the two of us caught in a storm of emotions that neither of us could control. But then, just as quickly as it had started, reality came crashing back in. Emma pulled away, her breathing ragged, her hands still resting on my chest. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of what we had just done sinking in. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, and I could see the same conflict in Emma's eyes that I felt in my own. She started, her voice shaky. We shouldn't have. I nodded, though my body was still humming with the aftermath of our kiss. I know. We sat there in silence, the tension between us thick and heavy, the air still charged with everything we weren't saying. I wanted to reach out, to pull her back into my arms, but I knew I couldn't.
Not now.
We can't do this, Emma whispered again, her voice filled with regret. We need to stop. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. You're right. But even as the words left my lips, I knew that stopping was going to be harder than either of us realized. We had already crossed a line, and now, there was no way to go back to the way things were before. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma slid off my lap and sat back down on the couch beside me, her body tense and her hands fidgeting in her lap. I could still feel the warmth of her touch lingering on my skin, the ghost of her lips on mine. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but all I could think about was how everything had changed in the blink of an eye. Neither of us spoke for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. I glanced over at Emma, noticing the way her fingers trembled as they twisted together. She looked conflicted, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. We should talk about this, I finally said, my voice sounding hollow and unsure. Emma looked at me, her expression unreadable. What is there to say? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to find the right words. We can't pretend this didn't happen. We need to figure out what we're going to do. Her eyes met mine, and I could see the turmoil there, the same confusion and guilt that was churning inside of me. I don't know what to do, she admitted softly, her voice trembling. I've never felt like this before. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest, and I realized just how deeply this moment had affected both of us. This wasn't something we could just brush off or ignore. It wasn't some fleeting, meaningless thing. It was real, and it was dangerous. We can't keep this a secret, I said, though the weight of those words made my stomach churn. If Claire finds out. Emma flinched at the mention of her sister, and I immediately regretted bringing it up. She can't know, she said, her voice sharp with panic. She would hate us. She would never forgive us. I swallowed hard, the guilt settling heavy in my chest. I know. But what are we supposed to do? We can't just act like nothing happened. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing across the living room as if the movement could help her shake off the emotions swirling inside of her. I don't know, she cried, her voice breaking. I don't know what to do. I shouldn't have kissed you. I shouldn't have. I got up and crossed the room, reaching for her arm gently. Hey, calm down, I said softly, trying to soothe her. It wasn't just you. I'm just as responsible for this. Her eyes were wide with fear and confusion as she looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw the girl I had known for years, the carefree younger sister who had always been around. But now, she was something else, someone I had crossed an unthinkable line with, and we were both left grappling with the consequences. Emma pulled away from my touch, wrapping her arms around herself protectively. "We can't let this happen again," she whispered, though there was a part of her voice that wavered, betraying the doubt I knew she was feeling. "It's wrong." I nodded, though my heart was still racing with the memory of her body pressed against mine. "You're right. We shouldn't have done that." But I hesitated, unsure of how to continue. "But what?" she asked, her gaze flicking back to mine, her brow furrowed. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "But we can't ignore what's between us. We can't pretend this attraction doesn't exist." Emma's face flushed, and she looked away, clearly uncomfortable with how open I was being. But I knew she felt it too. The tension, the connection that had been simmering between us for months, maybe longer. It was undeniable, and now that we had acted on it, there was no going back. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "Especially not Claire." "I don't either," I said softly, stepping closer to her. "But we need to be honest with ourselves, Emma. We need to figure out how to deal with this, or it's going to destroy us." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But instead, she took a deep breath and nodded, though the pain in her expression was still clear. "You're right. We need to talk about it. But not now. I need time to think." I nodded, understanding completely. "Take all the time you need. We don't have to figure this out today." Emma gave me a weak smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks. I'm sorry for dragging you into this." "You didn't drag me into anything," I said gently. "We're in this together." She gave a small nod, her lips pressed into a tight line as she turned and headed toward the hallway. I watched her disappear around the corner, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the house as she retreated to her room. I stood there for a long time, staring at the space she had just occupied, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. The guilt was overwhelming, and yet, I couldn't ignore the lingering sense of desire that still pulsed through me. I had kissed Emma, and it hadn't been a mistake, not in the moment at least. There had been something real between us, something powerful, and now, we were both left to deal with the fallout. I sat back down on the couch, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of the mess we had just created. Claire would be back soon, and I had no idea how I was going to face her, knowing what had just happened between her sister and me. The next few days were a blur. Emma and I avoided each other as much as possible, the weight of our secret pressing down on both of us. We exchanged only brief, polite words when necessary, but the tension between us was palpable. I could feel her eyes on me whenever we were in the same room, and I knew she felt the same, confused, guilty, but still undeniably drawn to me. The tension between Emma and me grew with each passing day. We danced around each other, avoiding eye contact, keeping our conversations short and polite. But underneath the surface, the unresolved feelings simmered. Every glance, every accidental touch, every moment we spent alone in the same room made my heart race, reminding me of that kiss, of the line we had crossed. I tried to focus on Claire, to be the partner she deserved, but it was impossible to shake the guilt. Every time she smiled at me, every time she reached for my hand, I felt the weight of the secret I was carrying. It was suffocating, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't look at her the same way. A week had passed since the kiss, and Claire hadn't noticed the change in the dynamic between Emma and me. At least, not yet. But I could feel it looming, the inevitable confrontation. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. That afternoon, Claire had gone out to run errands, leaving Emma and me alone in the house once again. I had been avoiding these moments, the times when it was just the two of us. But today there was no avoiding it. I was sitting on the couch, trying to distract myself with my phone, when I heard Emma come into the room. I tensed, instinctively bracing myself for the awkwardness that always accompanied our interactions now. "Can we talk?" Emma's voice was soft but steady. I looked up, surprised by the determination in her expression. She wasn't avoiding me this time. She was standing at the edge of the living room, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes locked on mine. "Yeah," I said cautiously, setting my phone down on the coffee table. "We probably should." She walked over and sat down beside me, though she kept a safe distance between us. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, neither of us sure how to start. "I've been thinking about what happened," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the kiss." I nodded, my throat tightening. "Me too. I don't know how we let it happen," she continued, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I mean, I do, but it wasn't supposed to happen. Not like that." "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's been messing with my head ever since." Emma looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and longing. "I can't stop thinking about it," she admitted, her voice trembling. "About you?" My heart pounded in my chest, the unspoken truth between us finally coming to the surface. "Emma?" "I know it's wrong," she interrupted, shaking her head as tears welled up in her eyes. "But I can't help it. Every time I see you, I remember that kiss, and it's all I can think about." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. My mind raced, trying to find a way to fix this, to undo the damage we had done. But there was no going back. I knew that now. "I feel it too," I admitted quietly, my voice breaking. "But we can't do this. It's not fair to Claire. It's not fair to anyone." Emma nodded, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. "I know. But it doesn't change how I feel." There was a long pause, the silence between us filled with the weight of everything we weren't saying. I wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, but I knew that would only make things worse. We had already crossed a line, and crossing it again would only lead to more heartbreak. "What do we do?" she asked finally, her voice barely a whisper. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "We have to stop. We can't let this go any further." Emma looked at me, her eyes searching mine, and I could see the struggle written across her face. She wanted to fight it just like I did. But we both knew the truth. We had to end this, or it would destroy everything. "You're right," she said softly, her voice full of sadness. "We can't keep going like this." There was a finality in her words that made my chest tighten. We both knew that this was the right decision, but that didn't make it any easier. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Emma shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Me too." We sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of our decision pressing down on us. The tension between us hadn't disappeared, but there was an understanding now, a mutual recognition that we couldn't keep going down this path. Eventually, Emma stood up, wiping her eyes. "I should go," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Claire will be back soon." I nodded, watching as she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the heaviness of everything that had happened. As the front door closed behind her, I sank back into the couch, my head in my hands. The living room was quiet now, but my mind was anything but. The guilt, the confusion, the desire, they all swirled together, creating a storm inside me that I didn't know how to control. I knew that I had made the right choice. We had to stop before things went any further. But as I sat there, staring at the empty space where Emma had been, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something important, something that could never be reclaimed. When Claire returned later that evening, I did my best to act normal, to push the thoughts of Emma out of my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget. The memory of that kiss lingered in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the line we had crossed and the consequences that came with it. As the days went on, Emma and I kept our distance. We were polite, friendly even, but there was a wall between us now, one that hadn't been there before. Claire remained blissfully unaware, and I knew that was for the best. But the guilt never went away. It lingered, a constant shadow that I carried with me. In the end, there was no clear resolution. No neat ending. Just a complicated, tangled mess of emotions that we would both have to live with. We had made our choice, but the consequences would follow us, a reminder of the connection we had tried so hard to deny.